My name is Claire, and I'm 29 years old. I was cradling my newborn son in that hospital room, my heart bursting with love. Nathan, my husband, couldn't stop smiling. Then my mother-in-law, Margaret, walked in. Her eyes locked on my baby, and her face turned to stone. She said, "This child can't be ours." The room went silent. Nathan looked lost, and I felt my world tilt. Why would she say that? What secret was she hiding? Have you ever had someone shatter your joy? Share where you're watching from below, and if this hits home, please like and subscribe. I sat in that hospital room, my son asleep in the bassinet beside me. His tiny chest rose and fell, and I tried to focus on that instead of Margaret's words echoing in my head. This child can't be ours. My fingers tightened around the blanket Nathan had draped over me earlier. He was out getting coffee, probably avoiding the tension that hung in the air, like damp laundry. I wanted to believe he was on my side, but his silence when his mother spoke stung worse than her accusation. The door creaked, and I looked up expecting Nathan. Instead, it was Margaret, her purse clutched tight against her chest. She didn't smile, just stood there, her eyes flicking to my son. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Margaret, what did you mean earlier about my baby?" She adjusted her scarf, her lips thinning. "Claire, let's not make a scene. I'm just looking out for my family." Her tone was clipped like she was scolding a child. I felt my cheeks burn. Family. As if I wasn't part of it after 3 years of marriage after carrying Nathan's son for 9 months. Looking out how I pressed sitting up straighter. My stitches pulled, but I ignored the pain. "You said he can't be yours." "What does that even mean?" Margaret's gaze darted to the bassinet, then back to me. "You wouldn't understand. It's about blood, Claire. Our blood." She said it like it was sacred, like I was some outsider tainting her precious lineage. I wanted to scream, but my son stirred, letting out a soft whimper. I reached for him, cradling him close, his warmth grounding me. Before I could respond, the door swung open again. Allison, Nathan's sister, stepped in her heels, clicking on the tile. She had that same sharp look as Margaret, but younger, meaner. "Mom, you okay?" she asked, barely glancing at me. I caught a whisper as they stepped into the hallway. Allison's voice low but clear. "She's always been trouble, Mom. You know her history." My stomach twisted. My history. What was that supposed to mean? I'd met Nathan in college, fallen hard. And yeah, we'd broken up once during sophomore year. I'd dated someone else for a few months, a guy named Derek, but that was years ago. Nathan and I got back together, built a life, got married. Did Allison think I'd been unfaithful? Was that what this was about? I rocked my son gently, trying to calm the storm in my chest. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I glanced at Margaret's purse left on the chair. It was open just enough to see a corner of a photo sticking out. I shouldn't have looked, but my hands moved before my brain caught up. I slid the photo out, careful not to wake my son. It was old, faded, showing a man I didn't recognize. Dark hair, stern eyes. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Keep the line pure." My breath caught. What line? What was Margaret hiding? I tucked the photo back just as Nathan returned, holding 2 coffee cups. His smile faded when he saw my face. "Claire, you okay?" he asked, setting the cups down. I wanted to tell him everything, but Margaret and Allison were back in the doorway watching us. "Just tired," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan nodded, but his eyes lingered on his mother, like he was waiting for her to explain herself. She didn't. Instead, she picked up her purse and said, "We'll talk later, Nathan." Rest, Claire. As they left, I held my son tighter, his soft breaths, the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I didn't know what Margaret meant by blood, but I knew one thing: she was wrong about my baby. And I was going to find out why she was so sure she was right. I stood in the hospital cafeteria, clutching a lukewarm tea, my son strapped to my chest in a carrier. His soft weight was the only thing keeping me grounded. Nathan had gone to take a call, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which spun like a carousel I couldn't stop. Margaret's words about blood and Allison's whisper about my history gnawed at me. I scanned the room, hoping for a distraction, but my eyes landed on Allison at a corner table, leaning close to a nurse in blue scrubs. Their heads were bent together, voices low, and I caught my name slipping from Allison's lips. I froze, my grip tightening on the tea. Allison's eyes flicked up, meeting mine, and a smirk curled her lips before she turned back to the nurse. My heart pounded. I wanted to march over, demand answers, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Instead, I slipped behind a vending machine close enough to hear without being seen. My son cooed softly, and I shushed him, pressing a kiss to his head. "She's not one of us," Allison was saying, her voice sharp like a knife's edge. "That baby, look at his hair. So dark. Nathan's blonde, Mom's blonde. It doesn't add up." The nurse murmured something I couldn't catch, but Allison laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, please, Tessa. Claire's got a past. She was with some guy in college, probably never got over him. I bet she's hiding something." I bit my lip so hard, I tasted blood. Derek, that's who she meant. A fling from years ago, long before Nathan and I said our vows. How did Allison even know about him? Had she been digging into my life, waiting for a chance to twist the knife? My chest ached, not just from the weight of my son, but from the betrayal sinking in. Nathan's sister. My sister-in-law was painting me as a liar in a hospital cafeteria while my baby slept against me. Tessa, the nurse, spoke up, her voice softer. "Allison, that's a big accusation. Claire seems sweet. Maybe you're reading too much into it." Allison snorted. "Sweet, she's an outsider, Tessa. Mom's always known it. She's just trying to protect Nathan. Protect him from what? Me, the mother of his child." I wanted to scream, to storm over and set her straight, but my son stirred, and I forced myself to breathe. I stepped out from behind the vending machine, my legs shaky, and walked toward their table. Allison's smirk faded when she saw me, but she didn't flinch. "Claire," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Didn't see you there." Clearly, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's this about my past, Allison? You got something to say? Say it to my face." Tessa's eyes widened, and she stood mumbling about a shift change before hurrying off. Allison didn't move, just tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she'd already solved. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," she said. "That baby doesn't look like Nathan. You do the math." My vision blurred with tears, but I refused to let them fall. "He's Nathan's son," I said, each word deliberate. "You don't get to decide who he is." Allison shrugged, standing and slinging her purse over her shoulder. "We'll see," she said, brushing past me. Her perfume lingered sharp and cloying as she disappeared down the hall. I sank into a chair, my son's warmth against me, the only thing keeping me from breaking. Tessa reappeared, hesitating before sitting across from me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle. "Allison's just repeating what Margaret's been saying. She's got this thing about family legacy. It's not about you, Claire, but it was about me. It was about my son. my marriage, my place in a family that seemed determined to push me out. I thanked Tessa, my voice hollow, and headed back to the room. Nathan was there, scrolling on his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing. I wanted to tell him what I'd heard, but his earlier defense of his mother stopped me. He'd said she was just protective of what? A legacy I didn't understand. A secret tied to that photo in her purse. As I tucked my son into his bassinet, I noticed Margaret's locket on the side table, left behind from her visit. It gleamed in the dim light, and my fingers itched to open it. I didn't. Not yet. But I knew whatever was inside held answers. And I was done letting Margaret and Allison whisper lies behind my back. I'd find the truth no matter how much it hurt. I stood in the nursery, my son's crib neatly made, his tiny onesies folded in the drawer. It had been a week since we left the hospital, but Margaret's locket still sat on my nightstand untouched. I couldn't bring myself to open it, not after Allison's words in the cafeteria. "She's not one of us." The accusation clung to me like damp clothes, heavy and cold. Nathan was at work, leaving the house quiet, except for my son's soft gurgles from his bouncer in the living room. I tried to focus on him, but my mind kept drifting to that photo in Margaret's purse, the cryptic note about keeping the line pure. The doorbell rang sharp and insistent. I scooped up my son, his warmth steadying me, and opened the door. Margaret stood there, her coat buttoned tight despite the mild spring air. Her eyes swept over me, then landed on my son. "Claire," she said, her voice clipped. "I need to see the nursery." I blinked, caught off guard. The nursery. Why she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I want to make sure it's suitable," she said, already heading upstairs. Suitable. My blood simmered. This was my home, my son's space, and she was acting like she owned it. I followed, cradling my son closer, his tiny hand curling around my finger. In the nursery, Margaret ran her finger along the crib's edge, her lips pursed. "This color," she said, eyeing the soft blue walls. "It's too modern. And these toys?" She picked up a plush elephant one Nathan had bought. "Cheap. My grandson deserves better." I swallowed the urge to snap, keeping my voice even for my son's sake. "Margaret, we chose everything with love. It's perfect for him." She turned, her eyes narrowing. "Love doesn't make a family, Claire. Heritage does. This room, this child, it's all wrong." Her words hit like a slap, and I felt my chest tighten. Wrong, my son, with his perfect little nose and dark curls, was wrong. Before I could respond, she moved to the dresser, opening drawers like she was inspecting a hotel room. My jaw clenched, but then I saw her pause, pulling out a small box I'd forgotten about. It held my old college photos, ones I'd meant to scrapbook. She flipped through them, her fingers lingering on a picture of me and Derek laughing at a campus party. My stomach dropped. "Interesting," she said, her voice dripping with something I couldn't name. "You kept these." "That's from years ago," I said, stepping forward. "Before Nathan and I got serious. Why are you even looking at that?" She didn't answer, just tucked the photo into her purse and closed the drawer. "I'll bring some proper toys next time," she said, brushing past me. "Something fitting for my grandson." I stood frozen, my son fussing in my arms. She'd taken the photo. Why was she building a case against me, feeding Allison's lies about my past? I settled my son in his bouncer and grabbed my phone, texting Julia, my best friend, who'd always had my back. "I need to talk. Can you come over?" Julia arrived within the hour, her curly hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with concern. I poured us coffee and told her everything. Margaret's nursery invasion, the stolen photo, the way she'd called my son wrong. Julia's jaw tightened. Claire, this isn't just about you. Margaret's got a history. Remember Nathan's cousin Jacob? She cut him off for marrying someone she didn't approve of, said he diluted the family. I frowned, stirring my coffee. Diluted? What does that even mean? She's obsessed with some old family legacy, Julia said, leaning forward. I heard she keeps a diary, tracks every birth, every marriage. It's creepy. You need to watch her. A diary. The thought sent a shiver through me. I glanced at my son, happily chewing on his fist. Margaret wasn't just questioning me. She was questioning his place in her world. And Nathan, he'd come home last night, listened to my worries, and said Mom's just intense. She'll come around. Come around. She was tearing me apart, and he was defending her. I walked Julia to the door, promising to call later. As she left, I noticed Margaret's scarf draped over the couch, left behind in her rush. I picked it up, and something heavy slipped out, hitting the floor with a thud. It was a small leather-bound book, its edges worn. My heart raced. Julia's words echoed. She keeps a diary. I opened it, my hands trembling, and saw Margaret's tight handwriting. One line stood out, dated years ago. The curse of our blood must end. Only the pure can carry on. My breath caught. What curse? What was she hiding? And why was she so determined to prove my son wasn't part of her family? I sat at the kitchen table, Margaret's diary open in front of me, the words about a curse burning into my mind. My son napped upstairs, his baby monitor humming softly. But even his peace couldn't calm the storm inside me. I'd hidden the diary under a stack of cookbooks when Julia left, afraid Nathan would walk in and see it. But now, alone, I couldn't stop reading. Page after page detailed Margaret's obsession with her family's lineage, names and dates, meticulously recorded, some crossed out with angry ink. One entry from decades ago mentioned a cousin disowned for tainting the blood. Was that Jacob? Was I next? The front door opened, and I snapped the diary shut, shoving it into a drawer. Nathan walked in, loosening his tie, his face tired but warm. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my forehead. "How's our guy?" "Sleeping," I said, forcing a smile. I wanted to tell him about the diary, about Margaret's visit, but his easy grin stopped me. He'd always brushed off his mother's quirks, and I couldn't bear another. "She means well excuse." Instead, I asked, "How was work?" He grabbed a beer from the fridge, shrugging. "Same old. But Mom called. She's worried about you. Says you seemed off when she stopped by." My stomach twisted. Worried about me? She'd called my son wrong, stolen my photo, and now she was spinning it like I was the problem. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. "Nathan, she didn't just stop by. She went through our nursery, criticized everything, and took a picture of me from college. She's acting like I don't belong here." He frowned, setting the bottle down. "Took a picture, Claire, that's a stretch. She's just adjusting to being a grandma. You're reading too much into it." His words hit like a punch. A stretch. I'd heard Allison's accusations, seen Margaret's cold stares, and now I held proof of her obsession in that diary. But Nathan, my husband, the man who'd vowed to stand by me, was siding with her. I stood my chair, scraping the floor. "Nathan, she's not adjusting. She's trying to push me out." "And you're letting her." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Claire, don't do this. She's my mom. She's family. And I'm not." My voice cracked louder than I meant. The baby monitor flickered a soft cry, breaking the silence. I turned away, heading upstairs to soothe my son, my heart pounding. Nathan didn't follow. Later, I sat in the rocking chair, my son nursing quietly, his tiny hand resting on my chest. The house was still, Nathan probably on the couch avoiding me. I couldn't shake the hurt the way he'd dismissed me like I was some paranoid stranger. I needed answers, someone to help me make sense of this. I texted Julia, "Can we meet tomorrow, somewhere private?" She replied instantly, suggesting a coffee shop across town. I agreed, tucking my phone away. As I laid my son in his crib, I heard the creak of the stairs. Nathan stood in the doorway, his eyes soft but guarded. "Claire." "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't want to fight. But Mom's going through something. She mentioned a DNA test for the baby. Just to settle things." My breath stopped. A DNA test? Margaret wasn't just questioning me. She was demanding proof my son was Nathan's, and Nathan was entertaining it. I stared at him, the man I'd built my life with, and saw a stranger. "Settle things," I whispered. "You think our son isn't yours?" I didn't say that, he said, quickly stepping closer. "But Mom's insistent, and it might shut her up." "Shut her up." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Nathan, she's accusing me of cheating. And you're okay with that?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I just want peace, Claire. Peace. At my expense. At our son's expense." I turned back to the crib, my hands trembling as I adjusted the blanket. "Go to bed, Nathan," I said, my voice cold. He hesitated, then left, his footsteps fading down the hall. I sank to the floor, my back against the crib, the diary's words echoing in my head. The curse of our blood. Margaret wasn't just doubting me. She was unraveling my family, and Nathan was letting her. Tomorrow, I'd meet Julia, find out more about Jacob, about this curse. But tonight, I felt alone, my son, the only thing keeping me from breaking. And deep down, I wondered if Margaret's poison had already seeped too far into my marriage to stop. I sat at Margaret's polished dining table, the chandelier casting a sterile glow over the room. My son was with Julia for the night, a rare break I'd agreed to for this family dinner. Nathan's hand rested on mine under the table, but it felt more like a tether than comfort. Margaret had insisted we come, calling it a chance to clear the air. I'd only agreed because I hoped foolishly she'd apologize for the DNA test demand. But as I watched her pour wine for Nathan's aunts and uncles, her smile tight and calculated, my stomach churned. This wasn't about peace. Allison sat across from me, her eyes glinting like she knew something I didn't. The clink of silverware filled the silence, broken only by small talk about the weather and Nathan's promotion. I picked at my salmon, my appetite gone. Nathan squeezed my hand, whispering, "It's fine, Claire. Just eat." But it wasn't fine. Margaret's gaze kept darting to me, sharp and unyielding, like she was waiting for the right moment. That moment came after dessert. Margaret stood, tapping her glass with a spoon. The room hushed, all eyes on her. "I have something to say," she began, her voice steady but laced with venom. "We're here as a family, but there's a shadow over us. Claire, I can't stay silent anymore. That child isn't Nathan's." The air vanished from the room. Nathan's hand froze on mine, his breath catching. Aunt Patricia gasped, and Uncle George leaned forward, his fork clattering to the plate. I felt every stare hot and heavy, pinning me to my chair. My heart pounded, but I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Margaret wasn't just whispering doubts anymore. She was declaring war in front of everyone. "Mom, stop!" Nathan said, his voice low, but Margaret raised a hand, silencing him. "No, Nathan. You deserve the truth. Claire's past her time with that other man in college. It's all too convenient. Look at the baby's hair, his eyes. He's not ours." Allison leaned back, a smirk flickering across her lips. She reached into her purse and slid a phone across the table, the screen glowing with a screenshot of old texts. My texts from years ago to Derek. "I miss you, one read. Wish we could try again." My throat closed. Those were from a breakup, a moment of weakness before Nathan and I rebuilt our love. How had she gotten them? Explain this, Claire, Allison said, her voice dripping with mock concern. You told Nathan you were over that guy, but these say otherwise. The room spun. Nathan pulled his hand away, his eyes fixed on the phone. I wanted to scream that those texts were ancient, that I'd chosen him, built a life with him, carried his son. But my voice was trapped, buried under the weight of their judgment. Aunt Patricia whispered to Uncle George, and I caught the word shame. Shame. As if I'd betrayed them all by existing. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling. Those texts are from college, I said, my voice shaking but clear. Years before our wedding. Margaret Allison, you're twisting my life to fit your story. My son is Nathan's. I don't need to prove that to you. Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she reached into her purse, pulling out a small box. A DNA test kit. Then you won't mind proving it, she said, setting it on the table like a challenge. Right here, right now. For the family. Nathan stared at the kit, his face pale. Claire, he said, his voice barely audible. Maybe we should just do it. To end this. My heart cracked. My husband, the man who'd held me through labor, was looking at me like I might be a liar. The room closed in the chandelier's light blinding. I wanted to run, to grab my son and disappear, but I was trapped, surrounded by their whispers, their doubts. And then I saw it. Margaret's locket dangling from her neck, swinging slightly as she leaned forward. It caught the light, and for a split second, it popped open, revealing a tiny photo inside. Not Nathan's grandfather, as I'd assumed. A dark-haired man, his face eerily familiar, like a ghost from her past. My breath stopped. Who was he? And why was Margaret so desperate to prove my son wasn't part of her blood? I stood there, the DNA test kit glaring up at me from the table, Margaret's words still ringing in my ears. The locket's brief glimpse of that dark-haired man haunted me, but I had no time to process it. Every face around the table was a blur of judgment, their whispers slicing through the silence. Nathan's silence cut deepest, his eyes still glued to Allison's phone, those old texts glowing like evidence of a crime I didn't commit. I wanted to grab his hand, force him to look at me, but my body wouldn't move. Margaret stepped closer, her voice rising sharp enough to shatter glass. Claire, you've brought this on yourself. If you'd been honest from the start, we wouldn't be here. But you hid your past, and now we're all paying for it. She turned to the family, her hands spread like a preacher. This is about protecting our name, our legacy. Nathan deserves better than a lie. A lie! The word landed like a stone in my chest. I opened my mouth to protest, but Aunt Patricia cut in, her voice trembling with pity. Claire, dear, just take the test. If you're telling the truth, what's the harm? Her kindness stung worse than Margaret's venom. Even the soft ones thought I was guilty. Allison stood her chair, scraping back, and held up another photo, this one printed not on her phone. It was me years ago at a bar with Derek, his arms slung over my shoulders. The room gasped, and Uncle George muttered something about disgrace. My knees buckled, but I caught myself on the table. Where did you get that? I asked, my voice hoarse. Does it matter? Allison said, tossing the photo onto the table. You were never good enough for Nathan. Mom saw it from the start. That baby's just proof. I stared at the photo, my younger self laughing, oblivious to the future where it would be weaponized. My son's face flashed in my mind, his dark curls so like mine, so like Nathan's when he was a baby. But no one here cared about that. They saw what Margaret wanted them to see, a stranger who'd tricked her son, tainted her bloodline. Nathan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, why didn't you tell me about him? All this time you kept it quiet." His eyes met mine, and I saw it, doubt raw and unfiltered, like a crack splitting us apart. My husband, the man who'd promised forever, was questioning our son's existence. I wanted to scream that I'd told him about Derek, that it was ancient history, that our love had survived worse. But the words stuck, choked by the weight of the room. Margaret seized the moment, her voice triumphant. "Nathan, you see, she's been hiding this for years. That child can't carry our name. We need the truth now." She opened the DNA test kit, pulling out a swab and holding it out to me like a weapon. The family leaned in, their eyes hungry for resolution for my humiliation. I took a step back, my hands shaking. "I'm not doing this," I said, my voice breaking. "My son is Nathan's. I don't need a test to prove it." "Then you're hiding something!" Margaret snapped, her face flushed. An innocent woman wouldn't run from the truth. The room erupted in murmurs, Aunt Patricia's voice rising above the rest. "Claire, just do it for Nathan, for the baby." Even she was against me now, her pity turning to pressure. I looked at Nathan, begging him with my eyes to stand up to defend me, but he just stared at the swab, his hands clenched in his lap. My vision blurred, tears burning, but refusing to fall. I was alone, surrounded by a family that had never accepted me, led by a woman who'd built a case against my son before he was even born. The locket's mystery, the diary's curse, none of it mattered in this moment. All I could feel was the weight of their doubt crushing me, stripping away the life I'd fought for. And then the doorbell rang, sharp and jarring, cutting through the chaos. Margaret froze, her hand still outstretched with the swab. No one moved, but I heard footsteps, then a voice from the hall. It was Hannah, my sister, her tone urgent. "Claire, you need to come to the hospital. It's about the baby." My heart stopped. My son. The room, the accusations, Margaret's smug face, all of it vanished. All I could think was that something was wrong with my son, and I was here drowning in their lies while he needed me. I barely registered Hannah's words as I pushed past Margaret and the stunned faces around her dining table. My son. Something was wrong with my son. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me out the door and into Hannah's car, Nathan trailing behind, his voice a distant murmur. "Claire, what's happening?" he asked, but I couldn't answer, my heart hammering too loud. Hannah drove her knuckles white on the wheel, explaining that Julia had called from the hospital. My son had a fever high and sudden, and they needed me there. The hospital lights were blinding as we rushed in, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. Julia met us in the pediatric wing, her face pale but calm. "He's stable," she said, squeezing my arm. "Just a fever, but they're running tests. He's with the doctor now." Relief hit me like a wave, but it didn't erase the panic still clawing at my chest. I nodded, barely hearing Nathan's questions to Julia as I pushed into the room where my son lay tiny and flushed in a crib, an IV taped to his arm. I sank beside him, my hand trembling as I touched his cheek. He stirred his dark curls damp with sweat and let out a soft whimper. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Mama's here." The sight of him so small and vulnerable burned away the fog of Margaret's accusations. Her dinner, Allison's photos, the DNA kit, they didn't matter now. My son needed me, and I'd failed him, stuck in that room defending myself while he was sick. Nathan hovered in the doorway, his face drawn. "Claire, he's okay, right?" he asked, stepping closer. I looked up, and the memory of his silence at dinner flooded back. He'd let his mother tear me apart, let her demand a test for our son, and now he stood here acting like it was all forgotten. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not anymore. "We need to talk." I said, my voice low but firm. Not here. At home. After he's better. Nathan nodded, his eyes searching mine, but I turned back to my son, stroking his hand. Julia and Hannah stayed close, their presence a quiet anchor. When the doctor confirmed it was just a viral fever, manageable with fluids and rest, I exhaled, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. Margaret's words, Nathan's doubt, they were still there, festering. Back home the next morning, my son asleep in his crib, I sat Nathan down at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the dawn light filtering through the blinds. I pulled out my phone, playing the recording Hannah had made at the dinner. Margaret's voice slicing through the silence. That child isn't Nathan's. Nathan's face paled as he listened, his hands clenching the table's edge. Claire. I didn't know she'd go that far, he said, his voice rough. I thought she was just worried. Worried? I said, my voice steady despite the ache inside. She humiliated me, Nathan. In front of your family, and you didn't stop her. You let her question our son. I slid the letter from Jacob across the table, the one Julia had found detailing his disownment for marrying outside Margaret's approval. This is who your mother is. She destroys anyone who doesn't fit her idea of family. And you're letting her do it to us. Nathan stared at the letter, his jaw tight. What do you want me to do, Claire? She's my mom. I want you to choose. I said my words sharp but calm. Me and our son or her. Because I'm done living under her shadow. I stood, pulling a folder from the counter. Inside was a printout Hannah had dug up, a genealogy record hinting at an adoption in Margaret's family buried decades ago. She's hiding something, Nathan, about her own bloodline, and I'm going to find out what. He looked at me, his eyes wide like he was seeing me for the first time. Claire, you're serious about this? Dead serious, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm not letting her hurt us anymore. We're going to therapy, Nathan, as a family. And you're going to tell her to back off or I will. I walked to the sink, rinsing my son's bottle, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. Something was shifting inside me, a fire I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just a wife or a mother anymore. I was a woman done apologizing for her place in this world. I stood in the therapist's office, the leather couch creaking under me as I shifted, my hands clasped tight in my lap. Nathan sat beside me, his posture stiff, while Margaret perched on a chair across from us, her purse clutched like a shield. The room smelled faintly of lavender, but it did nothing to ease the tension. Dr. Elise, the therapist, leaned forward, her glasses perched on her nose, her voice calm but piercing. Claire, why don't you start? Tell us why you're here. I took a breath, my son's face flashing in my mind, his fever now gone, but his vulnerability still raw. I'd spent too long shrinking under Margaret's shadow, letting her words carve away at my worth. No more. I'm here because I'm tired. I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. Tired of being accused of betraying my husband, tired of my son being questioned. Margaret, you called him a lie in front of your family. You demanded a DNA test. You made me feel like I don't belong. And Nathan, you let it happen. Nathan flinched, his hands tightening on his knees, but he didn't interrupt. Margaret's lips parted, ready to protest, but Dr. Elise raised a hand. Let her finish, she said, her tone firm. I nodded, grateful, and kept going. I've been married to Nathan for 3 years, I said, looking at Margaret. I carried his son, loved him through every fight, every doubt. But you've never accepted me. You dig into my past, twist it to fit your story. You talk about blood like it's all that matters, but you're tearing apart the family you claim to protect. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying it. I deserve better. My son deserves better. Margaret's face flushed, her fingers gripping her purse tighter. Claire, you don't understand, she said, her voice sharp. This family has a legacy. I'm protecting Nathan from mistakes. Mistakes I cut in my eyes locked on hers. My son isn't a mistake. Your legacy isn't my problem. Your fear is. I turned to Nathan, my heart racing, but my resolve unshaken. And you need to decide if you're with me or with her version of family, because I'm not begging for my place anymore. Dr. Elise nodded, scribbling something in her notebook. Margaret, how does hearing this make you feel? She asked. Margaret's jaw tightened, and she looked away, her silence louder than any defense. Nathan shifted his voice low. Claire, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought Mom would calm down. I was wrong. His eyes met mine, raw with guilt, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his loyalty to her. Dr. Elise turned to me. Claire, what do you need to move forward? I paused, the question sinking in. I needed peace, but not the kind Nathan had offered, the kind that came at my expense. I need boundaries, I said. Margaret, you don't get to control our family. No more accusations, no more tests. And Nathan, you need to back me up, not her. If we can't do that, I'll protect my son alone. Margaret stood, her chair scraping the floor. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I'm not the villain here. She stormed out the door, slamming behind her. I exhaled, my shoulders sagging, but I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. Nathan reached for my hand, his touch tentative. I'll talk to her, he said. I promise, Claire. I'm with you. His words were a start, but I knew promises weren't enough. I needed action proof he'd choose us over her. Dr. Elise closed her notebook, her eyes warm. This was a big step, Claire. What's next for you? I thought of Jacob, the cousin Margaret had cast out, living free despite her cruelty. I want to meet someone. I said, my voice quiet but sure. Someone who survived her. I need to know how he did it. Nathan looked confused, but I didn't explain. This was for me, for my son, for the family I was building, not the one Margaret wanted. As we left the office, the late afternoon sun hit my face, and I slipped my son's tiny socks from my pocket, rubbing them between my fingers. They were soft, worn from his first days, a reminder of why I was fighting. I tucked them back in my steps, firm on the pavement, and didn't look back at the door Margaret had slammed. For the first time, I wasn't running from her. I was walking toward my own truth. I parked outside Jacob's apartment, the engine ticking as it cooled. My son was with Hannah for the afternoon, giving me this rare pocket of time. The memory of the therapy session lingered, Margaret's slammed door echoing in my mind. I'd laid my truth bare, demanded boundaries, and Nathan had promised to stand by me. But promises were fragile, and I needed more than words. I needed to understand how someone had survived Margaret's wrath and built a life beyond it. That's why I was here, clutching Jacob's address, a scrap of paper Julia had slipped me after our last coffee. The building was modest red brick, with ivy creeping up the sides. I knocked my stomach tight, and Jacob answered, taller than I'd expected, his dark hair streaked with gray. His smile was warm but cautious, like he'd learned to guard it. Claire, right? He said, stepping aside. Come in. His living room was small, cluttered with books, and a guitar leaning against the wall. A photo of him and a woman, both laughing, sat on a shelf. His wife, I guessed. I sat on a worn couch, the fabric soft under my fingers, and explained why I'd come. I read your letter, I said, my voice steady. About how Margaret cut you off. I'm dealing with her now, and I need to know how you got through it. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. She's a force, he said, his voice low. When I married Lena, Margaret called it a betrayal, said I'd ruined the family name. She spread lies, turned my cousins against me. I was 25, thought I'd lose everything. He paused, rubbing his thumb over a callus on his hand. But I didn't. Lena and I built our own life. It's not perfect, but it's ours. I nodded, absorbing his words. She's doing the same to me, I said. Says my son isn't Nathan's, that I don't belong. I stood up to her, but it's like she's everywhere, even in my marriage. Jacob's eyes softened. That's her game. She controls through fear. But you're here, Claire. That's more than I did at first. He stood pulling a wooden box from a shelf. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed and tied with string. These are from my mom after Margaret disowned me. They kept me going. You need people, Claire. Not her people. Yours. His words hit deep, stirring something I hadn't named yet. People. I had Hannah Julia, maybe even Nathan if he kept his word. But Margaret's shadow was long, and I felt it even here. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Allison. Saw you at Jacob's. You're digging up trouble, Claire. Mom's furious. My breath caught. Allison was watching me. I showed Jacob the text, and he shook his head. She's scared, he said. You're not bowing to her anymore. He handed me a quilt patchwork, and heavy at stitches, uneven but strong. Lena made this when we started over. Take it. It's a reminder you can build something new. I held the quilt, its weight grounding me, but Allison's text burned in my mind. I thanked Jacob and left the quilt tucked under my arm. In the car, I checked my phone again. Another text, this time from Nathan. Mom's coming over tonight. We need to talk. My stomach sank. Margaret, furious, was coming to my home, and Nathan hadn't warned me until now. Was he still wavering, caught between us? I drove home, the quilt on the passenger seat, Jacob's words echoing. You need people. But as I pulled into the driveway, seeing Margaret's car already parked, I felt the air thicken. She was inside waiting, and Allison's warning rang. True trouble was here. I stepped out, my hand brushing the quilt, and walked toward the house, my heart steady but heavy, bracing for whatever she'd unleash next. I stepped into the living room, the quilt still under my arm, its weight a quiet anchor. Margaret sat on the couch, her posture rigid, a glass of water untouched on the coffee table. Nathan stood by the window, his arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. My son's laughter drifted from the baby monitor, a stark contrast to the silence swallowing the room. I set the quilt on a chair, my movements slow, deliberate, and faced Margaret. Claire, she said, her voice softer than I expected, but her eyes were hard, unyielding. You've been talking to Jacob, stirring up old wounds. She didn't raise her voice, but each word landed like a stone, heavy with accusation. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't flinch, though my pulse quickened. I'm not tearing anything. I said, my tone low, measured. I'm protecting my son. You're the one who's been lying, Margaret, about your family, your bloodline, your secrets. Her lips parted, a flicker of shock crossing her face before she masked it. Nathan turned from the window, his brow furrowed. Claire, what are you talking about? He asked, his voice tight, like he was bracing for something he didn't want to hear. I kept my eyes on Margaret. I know about the adoption. I said the genealogy record Hannah had found burning in my memory. Someone in your family wasn't born into it. You hid it, buried it like it was shame. But you're not as pure as you claim, are you? Margaret's hand twitched, reaching for her necklace. But it wasn't there. The locket, I realized, was still on my nightstand, its secrets locked away. Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw her falter, her armor cracking. You have no right, she whispered, her voice trembling. No right to dig into my past. No right, I said, stepping closer, my voice steady but cold. You accused me of cheating, called my son a fraud. You don't get to hide now. I turned to Nathan, his eyes wide, caught between us. She's been controlling you, Nathan, controlling us, and I'm done letting her. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The room fell silent save for my son's soft coos through the monitor. Margaret stood, her movements jerky, and grabbed her purse. I came to apologize, she said, her voice breaking, but you've gone too far, Claire. You'll regret this. She paused at the door, her eyes glistening, and for a moment I saw not the tyrant, but a woman haunted her own fears spilling over. The door closed softly behind her, not a slam, but a quiet surrender. Nathan sank onto the couch, his hands covering his face. Claire, he said, his voice muffled. What did you do? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the quilt, running my fingers over its stitches, each one a testament to Jacob's survival. Margaret's apology, if it was real, didn't erase the years of her control, the months of her doubt. And Nathan's question, heavy with blame, cut deeper than I expected. I'd stood up, claimed my ground, but the cost was this: a husband still tethered to his mother's shadow, a family fractured by truths I'd only begun to uncover. Julia arrived later, her arms full of decorations for the baby celebration she'd planned. She saw my face, the quilt, Nathan's silence, and didn't ask questions. Let's set this up, she said, her voice gentle, pulling me into motion. We hung streamers, laid out plates, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Margaret's trembling voice, Nathan's defeated slump. I'd pushed back, but the victory felt hollow, the air heavy with what was left unsaid. As Julia lit a candle on the table, its flame flickering in the dusk, I stood by the window, watching the street where Margaret's car had been. My son's giggle broke the quiet, a reminder of why I'd fought. But the ache in my chest grew, a quiet bruise spreading. I'd won this round, but at what price? The family I'd married into was crumbling, and I wasn't sure if Nathan would stand with me to rebuild. I pushed my son's stroller through the park, the late morning sun filtering through the oaks, casting dappled shadows on the path. His giggles rose as a squirrel darted across the grass, and I smiled, my chest lighter than it had been in weeks. The confrontation with Margaret, Nathan's quiet promise to stand by me, and Jacob's quilt folded neatly in my son's nursery. It all felt like a storm that had passed, leaving the air clearer, if not entirely calm. I wasn't naive. Wounds like these didn't heal overnight. But today, with the breeze soft against my skin, I could breathe. The park was quiet, just a few joggers and an old man feeding pigeons. I stopped by a bench, parking the stroller and adjusting my son's sun hat, his dark eyes bright with curiosity. I sat pulling a small notebook from my bag, one I'd started keeping to jot down moments like this, his first laugh, the way his fingers curled around mine. Writing them felt like anchoring myself, proof that joy existed despite the chaos Margaret had stirred. I flipped to a blank page, my pen hovering, and thought about Nathan. He'd been different since the therapy session, more present, asking about my day, helping with midnight feedings. Last night, as we washed dishes, he'd opened up about his mother's pressure growing up, her endless rules about family pride, her fear of losing control. I didn't see how it hurt you, he'd said, his voice low, scrubbing a plate until it gleamed. I'm trying, Claire. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now. A rustle in my bag broke my thoughts. I pulled out a letter, its envelope creased from Margaret's hurried exit days ago. She'd sent it through Nathan, asking for a chance to talk, promising to respect my boundaries. I hadn't opened it yet, unsure if I was ready for her words, her version of amends. Part of me wanted to tear it up, let the pieces scatter in the wind, but another part, quieter, wondered if understanding her might free me from her shadow. Footsteps crunched behind me, and I turned to see Tessa, the nurse from the hospital, pushing a bike her scrubs swapped for a sweater and jeans. "Claire?" She said, her smile warm. "Didn't expect to see you here." She propped her bike against a tree and sat beside me, glancing at my son. "He's growing fast." "He is," I said, tucking the letter away. "What brings you out? Needed a break," she said, stretching her legs. "Work's been heavy." "But you look different." Calmer. Her eyes were kind, but they saw too much, like she knew the weight I'd carried. I shrugged, watching my son kick his feet. "I'm trying to be. It's been a lot." I hesitated, then told her about the dinner, Margaret's accusations, my stand in therapy. Tessa listened, nodding, her hands folded in her lap. "You're stronger than you know," she said when I finished. "I had a family like that once. My dad, he was all about appearances. Judged every choice I made. I left, built my own life. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Her words settled in me like stones in a river, steady and sure. I thought of Jacob, of the quilt of the family I was choosing, not the one I'd been handed. "Thanks," I said, my voice soft. "That means more than you know." Tessa stood, grabbing her bike. "Keep writing in that notebook," she said, nodding at it. "It's how you'll remember who you are." She pedaled off, leaving me with the pigeons and the soft creak of the stroller. I opened the notebook again, my pen moving before I could overthink it. I wrote about the park, the way my son's laugh felt like sunlight, the way Tessa's story echoed my own. I wrote about Nathan's effort, about the letter I might read one day. The words flowed, not erasing the past, but weaving it into something I could carry. I closed the notebook, my son's babbling pulling me back, and leaned down to kiss his forehead, his warmth, a quiet promise that I was enough. I stood in the kitchen, the evening light slanting through the window, painting the counter in soft gold. My son was upstairs, tucked in his crib, his breathing steady through the monitor. Nathan chopped onions beside me, the knife's rhythm a quiet counterpoint to the sizzle of garlic in the pan. We were cooking something we hadn't done together in months, and the simple act felt like stitching a tear, not perfect, but careful. I stirred the sauce, the tang of tomatoes grounding me, and let myself feel the moment. Nathan glanced at me, his eyes softer than they'd been in weeks. "I called Jacob today," he said, his voice low like he was testing the waters. "Invited him and Lena over next weekend. Thought it'd be good for us for the baby." I paused, the wooden spoon still in my hand. Jacob, the cousin Margaret had erased coming to our home. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, a sign Nathan was stepping out from his mother's shadow. "I'd like that," I said, my voice steady, a warmth spreading in my chest. "He's good people." Nathan nodded, returning to the onions, but I caught the flicker of relief in his face. We didn't talk about Margaret, not tonight. Her letter still sat unopened in my drawer, and I wasn't ready to face it. But the space she'd once filled in our lives was shrinking, and I was learning to breathe in the gaps. Hannah arrived as we set the table, her camera slung over her shoulder, a grin on her face. "Brought dessert," she said, holding up a bakery box. She pulled out her phone, showing me photos from the baby celebration. My son's tiny hand clutching a balloon string, Julia laughing in the background. "You looked happy here, Claire," she said, her voice gentle. "Really happy." I studied the photos, my own smile unfamiliar, like a version of me I'd forgotten. "I was," I said, and meant it. That day with Jacob's quilt on display had been a turning point, a reclaiming of my place. I handed her phone back, my fingers brushing hers, and felt a quiet gratitude for her for staying when others hadn't. We ate, the clink of forks and Hannah's stories filling the room. She talked about her new job, her plans to travel, and I listened, letting her voice wash over me. Nathan reached for my hand under the table, his touch light, but sure, and I didn't pull away. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was trust, rebuilt one meal, one touch at a time. After Hannah left, I cleared the dishes, the kitchen now dark, except for the glow of a single lamp. I opened the cabinet to store the leftovers and found a small envelope tucked behind the spices, its edges soft from age. Allison's handwriting stared back at me, an apology note I'd ignored weeks ago. I held it my thumb, tracing the seal, and felt nothing, no anger, no need to read it. She'd chosen her side, and I'd chosen mine. I slipped the note into the trash, the act's simple final. Outside, the wind stirred, and I stepped onto the porch, the air cool against my skin. A wind chime hung above the door, one I'd bought after the celebration, its notes soft and uneven. I listened, my eyes on the stars, and thought of my son sleeping soundly, his world safe, because I'd fought for it. The chime's last note faded, and I stood there, still letting the quiet hold me, knowing I was ready for whatever came next. I sat on the back porch, the summer evening wrapping around me like a soft blanket. My son toddled in the grass, chasing a firefly that flickered just out of reach. His laughter, bright and unguarded, pulled a smile from me, one that felt new, unburdened. 6 months had passed since that night at Margaret's, since the hospital room where I'd held him through fever and fear. The scars of those days hadn't vanished, but they'd softened like lines in a sketch I'd learned to live with. The backyard was small, just a patch of green framed by a wooden fence, but it was ours. I'd planted a vegetable garden in the spring, a whim that turned into rows of tomatoes and basil, their leaves brushing my fingers as I weeded. Tending it had become my ritual, a quiet hour each morning while my son napped. I'd kneel in the dirt, my hands steady, and feel the weight of the past slip away, replaced by the simple act of growth. Nathan was inside, strumming his guitar, the notes drifting through the open door. He'd started playing again, something he'd abandoned under his mother's expectations. Therapy had helped not just for us, but for him, untangling the threads of her control. He wasn't perfect, neither was I, but we were learning step by step to choose each other over old wounds. Last week, he'd framed a photo of us at the park, my son on my shoulders, and hung it in the hallway. I passed it every day, a reminder of what we'd built. Margaret had come by earlier, her visit brief, her demeanor subdued. She'd brought a wooden rattle for my son, her hands hesitant as she handed it over. "I'm trying, Claire," she'd said, her voice low, almost fragile. I'd nodded, letting her sit with him for a moment, but kept my distance. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a path, and I was still walking it. She'd left without pushing, and I'd felt no anger, just a quiet resolve to guard my peace. Jacob and his wife Lena were due tomorrow, their first visit since the baby celebration. I'd baked a loaf of bread for them, the kitchen still warm with its scent. Jacob had called last night, his voice steady, sharing stories of his own son now grown. "You're doing right by your boy," he'd said, and I'd held those words close, letting them settle in the places Margaret's doubts had once torn. I leaned back in my chair, the porch creaking under me, and watched my son stumble, then stand, his small hands reaching for the sky. The firefly blinked again, and he squealed undeterred. I thought of the garden, the way seeds I'd planted months ago were now heavy with fruit. Healing wasn't loud or dramatic. It was this dirty knees, a child's laugh, a husband's quiet tune. I'd fought for this not with fists, but with choices, each one a brick in the life I was shaping. The air cooled, and I stood scooping my son into my arms, his warmth, familiar grounding. He nestled against me, his eyelids heavy, and I carried him inside, the guitar's melody wrapping around us. I laid him in his crib, smoothing his blanket, and paused, my hand resting on the railing. The world felt still, not perfect, but whole. and I exhaled, ready to carry that stillness forward. I woke before dawn. The house hushed, my son's soft snores humming through the monitor. I slipped downstairs, the floor cool under my bare feet, and brewed coffee, its bitter warmth steadying me. The kitchen table held a small journal, leather-bound one I'd bought after the park that day with Tessa. I opened it, my pen scratching softly, and wrote a letter to my son, not for now, but for years ahead, when he'd ask about the family we'd built, the battles we'd faced. Dear little one, I wrote you were born into a storm, but you were my light. I fought for you, not just against others, but against my own doubts. You taught me that love isn't blood or names, it's the choices we make, the hands we hold, the truths we protect. I paused, my eyes tracing the window where dawn was breaking a thin line of pink against the gray. You'll find your own storms, but you'll also find your strength. I'll be here always. Writing it felt like setting down a weight I'd carried too long. Margaret's accusations, Allison's betrayal, Nathan's wavering, they'd shaped me, but they didn't define me. I'd learned to see past the noise, to find clarity in the quiet moments, a garden blooming, a guitar's tune, my son's fearless chase for fireflies. Healing wasn't about erasing pain. It was about choosing what to carry forward, what to let fall. I thought of Margaret, her brittle pride, her hidden fears. I'd buried her locket in the garden last month, not out of anger, but release, letting her past rest where it belonged. She'd visit tomorrow, limited to short moments, her role in our lives small, but no longer venomous. I didn't hate her. I pitied her, a woman chained to a legacy that never truly mattered. That pity, I realized, was my freedom proof I'd outgrown her shadow. Nathan stirred upstairs, his footsteps soft as he checked on our son. I closed the journal, slipping it into a drawer, and poured him a cup of coffee. He joined me, his hand brushing mine, a silent acknowledgement of the work we'd done to rebuild. Jacob and Lena's laughter from their visit yesterday still echoed in my mind, a new thread in the family we were weaving, one rooted in acceptance, not control. The lesson wasn't loud, but it was deep. Family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose to nurture. I'd spent years seeking approval, bending to fit Margaret's mold, but my son showed me I was enough, flawed, fierce, whole. I'd learned to stand not for others' validation, but for my own truth. And that was the gift I'd pass to him, the courage to choose love over fear, always. I sipped my coffee, the dawn, now bright, and felt a stillness settle in my bones. The world was messy, but it was mine, and I was ready to live it one quiet, honest step at a time. What truth have you had to fight for in your own life? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding your light wherever you are.